Welcome back to the London Jesuit Centre for our final podcast on the Christian theology of creation. I'm John Moffatt, and in this episode, we're going to think about what a Christian understanding of creation has to say about the meaning of life in this world. In particular, we're going to look at how it affects church teaching on social and ecological justice. I'm actually going to begin by thinking about worldviews which don't include God. I'm doing this because the conversations about ecology and justice are not just Christian conversations. They are conversations with other religious people who share a belief in a creator God, and with people who have no belief in God at all. We need to remember that modern Christians, just like the Jews in Babylon and Persia, can learn to deepen their understanding of the world by listening to the other voices around them. For some, it might seem a bit surprising, but the idea that there is no God in charge of the world is actually very old. 350 years before Jesus, the popular ancient philosopher Epicurus and his followers believed that our world and our lives were the product of chance and mechanical forces. According to Epicurus, our world, with its natural laws, its stars and its planets, is just a tiny corner of an infinite universe. The visible world around us has come about by the chance movement of atoms. Complex life has emerged out of simplicity. If there are any immortal gods, they are only immortal because somehow they are able to stay out of the way of random erosion from the atoms. For Epicurus, there is no big story to the world, no drama of salvation beyond death. There is only the experience of suffering that comes about from the perpetual bombardment of the atoms. So Epicurus proposed a way of life that responds to our human helplessness in a world that does not care for us. We should live simply, avoid conflict, minimize the pain and distress, and share occasional moments of delight, until, eventually, we dissolve back into atoms and enjoy the peace that comes from annihilation. There are modern versions of that story. Some are a bit more dynamic. Atheist existentialists contrast the meaningless mechanical physical world with our human experience of free will. The physical world grinds on as it must, but I can choose freely in the middle of it all. I can create myself as a person. I can create a life and take full responsibility for it, even though I am surrounded by other beings who restrict my freedom. Even though whatever I do, whatever I create, my life will end in the nothingness of death. Salvation, or human fulfillment, is found in the authentic exercise of our freedom, a freedom bounded by death. Or there is the Marxist drama of salvation. The universe evolves in a series of violent struggles towards a more just social order. If humans have a choice, it is to decide where they stand in the historical processes that lead away from the oppression of the working poor into a world in which all human beings can delight in the fruits of their labor. That contrasts with a secular version of the prosperity gospel, still very popular with people with financial and political power, Christian and non-Christian. Adam Smith's economic theory suggests that, provided markets are kept as free as possible, something like an invisible hand will ensure the best possible distribution of wealth. We only need to let wealth creators do what they do. Jeremy Bentham tried to put an ethical response to problems of social justice on a scientific basis. As with Epicurus, in a godless world, all we can look forward to as individuals is moments of happiness and freedom from pain and distress. The good thing to do, then, is to make as many people as happy as possible. So we should strive for the prosperity of the greatest number in society as a matter of natural justice. Then there's a powerful belief that all humans have a value as free beings, that they have rights which are to be protected everywhere and in all circumstances. The theory has strong roots in the Jewish and Christian traditions, taking seriously the idea that every human is in the image of God, the imago Dei, and has irreducible value. But it is also taken up by people, whether they believe in God or not, who naturally care for people and have a sense of mission to protect the poor and marginalised. In our own time, we have seen a new ethical concern become critical to any modern account of the meaning and purpose of human life: the concern for the planet we share. We value human life in the context of all other living things. We celebrate the integrity of our planet, its systems, and its diversity of life. Our planet and the life it supports is a beautiful and valuable system, and we humans have a choice about whether to nurture that or to exploit and destroy it. Many leading figures in the ecological movement have no belief in God. Indeed, you sometimes hear the argument that believing in the Creator distracts from seeing the wonder of the natural world. Nevertheless, care for creation is also a strand in many religious traditions, including Christianity. But how does a Christian understanding of creation make a difference? In many ways, Judaism seems much closer to effective secular ideas about promoting social justice and the value of creation in comparison with Christianity. So much of the Old Testament is about how to live life according to God's law in this world, a world that has been made good and is there for the good of all. The words of the prophets frequently denounce the oppressive behavior of rulers and the economically powerful, and promise that God is on the side of the poor and marginalised. In contrast, the big story of the New Testament clearly looks towards the end of this world, a final judgment, and a rescue from the destruction of the known universe. Salvation for faithful Christians means being rescued for an eternal resurrection life in the new creation, not for a kingdom of peace and justice on this earth. Nevertheless, how we live our life in this world has always been important for Christians. Paul tells his Christians to work out their salvation in this world in fear and trembling. And there is plenty of other material in the New Testament to point the way. Christians are supposed to form communities that are special, that are, in some way, are signs on earth of what the kingdom of God is meant to be like. According to Luke, the Jerusalem church originally practiced a sort of communism, holding all their goods in common as a sign that the new age had begun. We also find a strong message about God vindicating the poor and marginalized throughout his gospel. So let's begin looking at some of the deep reasons why traditional Christianity has always recognized that this world and what humans do in it matters, even as they look forward to a new creation, a world to come. The authors of Genesis 1 left a puzzle, as we saw last time. When God created the world, Genesis suggests, there was stuff already around. The primal waters of chaos, brought to order by God's word. Some interpreters of that text in the world of Jewish and early Christian thought suggested that matter itself was in some sense evil, and that the physical world was therefore bad, resistant to God's goodness. Salvation meant escaping from the physical realm to a spiritual one. Mainstream Christians rejected that idea very early on, along with the suggestion some were making that the God who made the physical world wasn't the real God. We can hear that rejection in the Apostles' Creed. I believe in one God, and that one God makes all things, seen and unseen, physical as well as spiritual. Early Christians made an important choice that the God who looked on the new created physical world and saw that it was good is the same as the God of Jesus Christ, who rescues us from sin and death. That means that our physical world and our lives within it have value. It really does matter what we do. We're not just hanging on in until the end of the world arrives. The Old and New Testaments are consistent. Christian communities are called to be signs of God's justice and to protect the poor and weak just as much as the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas tried to make sense of these two bits of the story of salvation by making a distinction between the order of nature and the order of grace. The way the natural world is organized and the way humans operate in it is basically good in spite of the flaws due to sin, because that is how God made it. People plant crops, the rains fall, the crops grow. People harvest the food and raise their families. All of that is good. None of this will get them to heaven, of course. That bit of the salvation story belongs to the order of grace, where God alone rescues us from sin and death. Nevertheless, this is one way of trying to acknowledge that there is an intrinsic value to life in this world. During the long centuries in which Europe was ruled by Christian monarchs and republics, a lot of thought was given by theologians to what it meant to live God's way in this world. That did not always make Christian rulers any better or more just than their non-Christian counterparts. But it did mean that when the Roman Catholic Church was trying to work out how to respond to the social and economic crises of the 19th century, they did not have to start from scratch. Pope Leo XIII published his encyclical on revolutions right at the end of the 19th century. It was the first, and somewhat belated, official Catholic response to problems of poverty, exploitation of labour and unemployment in the modern era. It considered not just duties and rights, but the need for change at the level of political choices and economic systems. When Pope Francis produced Laudato Si in 2015, his team was writing in that same tradition, making clear that the ecological crisis is also a social crisis, because it affects the lives of the poor and marginalised so much more drastically than the rich and the powerful. As I said, the people who wrote the encyclical for Leo weren't starting from scratch. Many elements of this social teaching of the Church can be found in the prophet Amos, the challenge to the rich and powerful to care for the poor and weak in society, and not cheat them of their due. But one vital and revolutionary principle it uses had been spelt out in the Middle Ages. It is a principle that is really helpful when we ask questions about ecological justice: the common destination of goods. And it comes from reflecting on the creation story in Genesis. Ask yourself this question: if creation is good, who are the good things of creation for? Some people might say, in the beginning, there were two human beings, and they had a right to whatever came into their possession. So that means whatever bit of creation comes into your possession is yours. That looks like a divine right to hold on to private property, come what may. This is very convenient reasoning if you have acquired land in colonies abroad like John Locke, who suggested this sort of argument. But that's not how Thomas Aquinas read things 4 centuries earlier. He accepts that some individuals have indeed acquired more wealth, property, land than others as a fact. That is, after all, the way things actually are. But when he reads Genesis, he sees creation as being given not to 1 or 2 particular humans, but in the person of the Adam, the first human, to the whole of humanity. This gives us a genuinely revolutionary concept: the common destination of goods. The good things of the earth are really there to be enjoyed by everyone. So if some people end up having more good things than others, it is not so that they can build a fence around them to keep everyone else out. Instead, God has entrusted them with those good things and has given them the task of making sure that as many people as possible benefit from them. That interpretation gives a powerful argument for challenging political and social systems that exclude people from enjoying the good things of the earth. It is also a powerful argument for challenging those who exploit the good things of the earth to the immediate benefit of a few, but with a terrible cost for billions of people now and in the future. As Pope Francis says, the social and ecological crises go together. The principle of the common destination of goods points to a solution. Modern theologians share contemporary concerns about the way we live now and about all life on the planet. They try to understand the tradition of interpreting what creation is about, from Genesis and other relevant Bible texts, all the way through the writings of great Christian thinkers through the centuries and the official decrees of the Church. They then try to formulate new ways of thinking about these things that can help modern Christians live well. How do they go about this? They might look back at Genesis 1 and reflect on God's commandment to the new human beings. But is God really asking the humans to fill the earth and subdue it? That sounds like imperial language, treating the natural world as an enemy to be defeated or a resource to be exploited rather than a partner. Is that the only message to be found in the text? Some scholars focus on the Hebrew word we often translate as subdue, and find that it has other shades of meaning that suggest something more like stewardship than domination. Others compare the paradise scene in Genesis 2, representing an ideal relationship between humans and the natural world. There the human is more like a gardener, someone who has been entrusted with care of an environment where all that is needed for life is there. They could draw inspiration from later responses to the creation story of Genesis. In the book of Daniel, for instance, every created thing in turn exists just to praise its creator. To him be highest glory and praise forever. Humans stand alongside the whole of creation in joining this cosmic hymn of praise to the Maker. Such a sense of a deep solidarity and kinship with our fellow creatures is expressed in the hymn of St. Francis of Assisi, from which the Pope's letter gets its title, Laudato Si. St. Francis reimagines all created things not as the property of humans, but as their brothers and sisters, and deserving their loving concern. The work of interpretation is important if Christians are to become motivated to work for a way of life that protects the natural world and does justice to all people. They need to feel some of that bond of solidarity from Francis's song, to feel some of that loving concern for their fellow creatures. Much of Pope Francis's letter is aimed at helping Christians and others to see things differently in order to find that motivation within themselves. I want to end with an especially important example of the way a philosophical idea used to interpret Genesis can lead us all to a life-changing way of looking at the world around us and open us to a deeper sense of solidarity with our world. Good theological ideas can help our motivation, help us to live better. In Genesis 1, God says, "Let there be light," and light comes into being. We saw how Jewish and Christian theologians noted a similarity with Aristotle's God, who is the ultimate source, making the universe be what it is from moment to moment. But just hold on to that thought and let it work on your imagination. God is making the universe be what it is from moment to moment. God is sustaining this physical world, you and me in it, the phone in your hand, all of this, now, as you listen to these words. If we take that idea seriously, every particle of everything that exists before us speaks of the sustaining power of God. That makes the whole universe what Catholics would call a sacrament, a tangible expression of the power and love of God in time and space. It follows that by immersing ourselves in an awareness of the world in the present moment, we can encounter the gift of God. A great French spiritual director, Jean-Pierre de Caussade, talked about something like this as the sacrament of the present moment. St. Ignatius of Loyola uses such a meditation on the gifts of the created world in his Contemplation for Attaining Love. The Jesuit paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin, the one who wrestled with the theory of evolution in the first half of the 20th century, also captured the idea of the world as a sacrament in a powerful act of scientific and religious imagination. He found himself on an expedition in a desert in China at the beginning of the 20th century, unable to celebrate Mass. Instead, he reimagined the different parts of the Mass as a meditation on God's presence at work in the unfolding of the world. He praises God with a vision of the planet and the whole cosmos, whose forces are shot through with the active power of God's Spirit, drawing all of creation towards completeness in Christ, the work of a holy trinity of love. So let's finish our journey through the story of creation with that image. I hope these podcasts have opened up helpful ways of thinking about the text you will be using with your students and pointed the way towards helpful connections for later learning. So thank you very much for listening, and all the very best for the amazing work you do.